I think my career, my approach has always been shaped by this, knowing that the next disaster, next business continuity event is just around the corner. How are we going to react to that from an operational, from a cyber perspective?
Conventional wisdom about cybersecurity that you think is quite outdated today?
Uh, there's a lot. There's a lot of varying degrees. I think you can't come in with the assumption that everybody's thinking about cybersecurity. I think the other thing is an organization doesn't merely exist to be secure.
So the previous guest asked you, how do you think human-centric security will look like in 2030 with the current technology trends?
So I think it's only going to improve. I think this is primarily a generational shift, right? I think this generation, including myself, didn't grow up with technology in its current form. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have internet. We didn't. PCs were like an anomaly, right? Some of us used them, some of us didn't. So I think the lift in terms of getting us in this generation to acknowledge risk, to train on risk, to train how to use this technology. We're already
Yeah.
trying to look ahead 4 to 5 years, right? With the rapid changes you mentioned in technology, AI in general, it seems like every week or every other week some new feature, a new company or new method comes out to work with this.
Hi, Jim. Welcome to Be Fearless podcast. Such a pleasure to have you here with us.
Well, thank you, Sasha. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'd love to introduce you to our listeners. So Jim Rutt's been in the industry for more than 20 years, and right now his role is CISO and CIO at Dana Foundation, a private philanthropic organization focused on neuroscience research. And you have experience in financial, healthcare, and pharmaceutical sectors. So quite a diverse range for anyone looking to tap in into one industry or another. And you've spoken at many conferences and you've been speakers at quite a few events. And you're actually one of the very few CISOs that I've spoken to in philanthropy space. So I'm super excited for this episode. I love the whole theme of philanthropy. And yeah, I'm just excited to learn about your journey. But I think the right approach would be to learn how you got into this space and what led you there. Was it something that you always wanted to do, or was it something that you were just thrown into?
Very good question. So actually, coming out of college, I got into marketing first, and I did that for about 6 years. After which, I think the rise of the internet in the mid '90s uh, kind of propelled me into some interest into developing a technology career. So I actually started on the data warehousing and data analytics side, believe it or not.
Mm,
Then progressed into general infrastructure management. Probably around 2000, 2001, got my first management job. That was in healthcare. And it was about the rise of a lot of regulatory uh, things around healthcare, like HIPAA and high tech, et cetera. So we were not prepared to really have a discipline or a practice around this, much less it wasn't really known. The role of CISO or role of the head of security was kind of, I would say, very nascent. So we started learning about these things, started to build a security practice, started to hire the right kind of folks, and I've been involved in some way, shape, or form with security and infrastructure and general applications, and et cetera, since then. So it's about 25 years.
all right, all right. So it really looked like as the industry was developing, so that your role was also developing, and you really started from you were mentioning data. Do you think, in a way, it shaped your approach, how you look at the challenges today?
Yes, absolutely. I think from a data perspective, obviously, those are the crown jewels of any respective organization. You got to
Mhm.
be able to protect those first and foremost, and be able to protect in general all the assets of your respective organization. So I think as the level of threats, I mean, remember 25 years ago, there were very basic types of threats, very
Mm,
basic types of security controls as well. But as we've seen over the past 10 to 15 years in general, the pernicious level of threats has risen dramatically. The complexity of the threats have risen dramatically as well. Fortunately, a lot of the controls and a lot of the discipline around approaching security and its information security program in general, I think it's gotten a lot more serious. And I think the biggest change is the willingness of organizations and the respective security leaders to share their experiences. I think 25 years ago, nobody wanted to do this. Everybody was, I don't want to give away my plan for how I secure an organization. But I think everybody came to realize that we as a security collective or security community, we have no other choice but to collaborate on effective defenses and controls to reduce our respective risks because we don't know who's attacking us. There's nation state level attackers. There are very organized levels of hackers or levels of pernicious actors out there trying to either gather our data or put us out of business one way or the other. So I
mm.
think we have no other choice to come together, and it's very heartening to see the level of collaboration that's evolved over the past 25 years.
Yeah, yeah, and I think this collaboration is only gonna strengthen as we go further. Um, it's
Indeed.
uh, it's very exciting to look how this whole space is gonna develop in the next few years because it really feels like every month something new comes up, and respectively something has to come up on the security side.
Yes.
Um, yeah. So you worked in highly regulated industries in finance, healthcare, pharma. What led you to eventually go into the profit sector?
Well, it wasn't totally by choice, if I'm going to be honest.
Mm,
So, at the end of 2009, we had something called the Great Financial Crisis recession here in the U.S. I think the organization I was with was having some issues as well. So, unfortunately, it ended up in a layoff. So, I had interviewed with the Dana Foundation in 2010 or mid 2010, and I thought this is an entirely different area, although similar from the healthcare perspective because we're a funding organization funding grants for neuroscience. So I said, you know what, there could be some connection here.
mhm.
And so I said, you know, let me give it a shot. I've done three other industries, like you stated at the outset. Let me try a
Yeah.
different one here. It's been phenomenal. I've been there ever since 15 years. Big believer in the mission, the vision of the organization, and how it's evolved over the past 15 years is super exciting. Going
Mm,
from basic neuroscience to neuroethics in society, which which kind of borders AI ethics in society. Very topical and relevant,
yeah.
given the AI revolution that is happening right now. It's very, very exciting time, as you stated. But I think it's going to have its own specific challenges.
Mm, mm. I'm really curious because it doesn't happen that often, especially in today's day and age, where people really choose to stick to a certain sector or to be even, concrete here to a certain company for such a long time. I'm really curious, how did your role evolve in the organization as you were just mentioning, so many things were changing inside in the industry. How do you think it influenced your role?
Well, when I started, they really didn't have. It was actually an interesting story because everything had been outsourced. So it was actually the reverse of some of the trends that we're seeing in general, where some organizations are looking to outsource. Dana was actually outsourcing all of these functions, now looking to insource them. So we had to build everything essentially from scratch. I mean, a program for infrastructure management, program for
Mm,
security management in general. So that took a number of years. What was interesting was it came about just about the time is like what I would call the cloud revolution, right in the early 2010s, when
mhm,
folks are starting to realize, hey, listen, we can get a lot more agility, a lot more economies of scale, a lot more benefits in general from migrating our old legacy on-premise type applications, which Dana had a number of them, into the cloud. And
Mm-hmm.
we took somewhat of a calculated risk there, because we decided after a couple of initial migrations to the cloud that we wanted to do it all in the cloud. And I think one of the major drivers there was the area of resiliency, which ties directly into security. I think having all your eggs in one basket in a physical location didn't make sense anymore, especially in New York, where we had our share of let's call it business continuity situations there. So, over the evolution as of in terms of managing to the cloud, both from operational security, governance, resilience, risk, all these different things. It took a very natural progression after we were able to master those initial steps.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting, and I really want to touch upon this topic as you all brought up that a lot of companies right now are looking for ways to outsource a lot of things, and you took more of a reverse approach. Um, what do you think really led you to take that approach and not the reverse what is happening today right now in other industries?
Yeah, I've been observing the general trend of outsourcing for many years, and I think one of the key areas that folks really need to understand is when you outsource, you can only outsource primary responsibility for these programs and systems. You cannot outsource ultimate responsibility for these programs and systems. And I think a lot of folks in general want to take complexity out wherever possible. It's not just limited to technology in cybersecurity. It's limited to it can encompass a number of different operational or back office areas. But I think a lot of folks, when they take that knee jerk reaction, don't really think about the downstream effects of moving any kind of operation outside of your purview, your perimeter, what have you. And a lot of folks really need to think through what could happen down the road as a result of these things. And I think now that outsourcing for cybersecurity has become, you know, quite an active topic. This is the other another yet another situation I think that really I think requires a lot of due diligence, due care in identifying what is appropriate to outsource, what is appropriate to keep in house, and it may not just be subject matter expertise as a as a deciding factor. It may not just be cost. It's understanding where your risk lies, who's best uh, served to protect these things. So a lot more options than just looking at the at an algebraic formula and thinking, okay, if I outsource this, I'm going to save a ton of money. It could ultimately cost you in the end.
Yeah, yeah. We really sort of went towards the supply chain risk, which is a very big risk and
Mm,
probably present throughout the whole time that cybersecurity exists.
yeah,
And what is your view when it comes to the size of a company? Because it's only natural. You want to, as you mentioned, do as many things in house, but when it comes to smaller organizations, what is more advisable from your perspective, to outsource it or still have it in house?
it entirely depends upon what you're managing in terms of risk. How your risk register looks, and ultimately what your executive or board of directors feel that it's most important to protect. If they don't feel remember that the board of directors, and this is basic, governance, they're ultimately responsible for the risk of the organization. The executive team is primarily responsible for the managing the risk and understanding where risk lies, who needs to own that risk, and you as the head of security or head of infrastructure devise the controls around those and then present them as options to the leadership bodies and then they ultimately decide what's important. Your role is not to own or decide what risk is most important. That's really the board and the executive committee. So, you're more or less a tactician, but to get to that point, you have to be pretty skilled in understanding how to calculate that type of risk.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, even in your role, you're wearing dual hats. You're both a CISO and a CIO.
Yeah.
How do you manage to be excited about adoption of a new tech at the same time to protect it? Because oftentimes in many organizations, those roles can go against each other. How do you manage this too?
I would argue it's actually easier than an organization that has separate organizations parallel for cybersecurity and for infrastructure. Why? Because when I bring on a new technology, I already want to bake in the appropriate security controls prior to implementation rather than to spray them on afterwards. And it's a lot easier in one area to handle all these steps rather than having two distinct parallel heads or organizations try to figure this out. I would argue it's much safer.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I never thought about it. I'm sure there was a lot of conflicts that exist in many
I,
large organizations.
I've been party to many. Yes, Sasha. Yeah.
Yeah, and the whole nonprofit space and philanthropic space is so different from
Yes.
any other spaces. So I'm very curious, what do you think some of the industry specific challenges that you faced from the security standpoint that might surprise many people out there?
Sure. I mean, there's the ones that are not so much a surprise, like in making sure our critical IP and data is protected. I mean, that's pretty true for any organization across the board. Uh, but we have a lot more in terms of what I would call ethereal types of risks. So we have a brand, goodwill. These are very, very important to us. We have to make
Mm,
sure that any kind of a potential attack or any kind of potential data exfiltration, for instance, won't harm our brand or our mission or vision. I think as well, given the current situation or environment in terms of funding in general, this is even more amplified because we have to be very careful when we give an organization money. And to back up a bit, we don't take in donations. We work on an endowment, so we have risks just around managing the endowment and the associated investments as well. But when we give out money to organizations, we have to make sure both from a public and a practical perspective that we're doing the right thing, the recipient's doing the right thing. There's a whole stream of what could happen in between there. It's not just writing a check and throwing it into the wind.
yeah,
There's a lot of pieces there that have to be governed more or less.
yeah.
And I think data is the underpinning piece of that.
Yeah, data is a big one, and I'm sure there are so many additional challenges, and as you mentioned, moving pieces that a lot of people don't realize. And on the top of that, I would say that foundations often operate on leaner teams,
Yes.
and budgets are typically more constrained than bigger corporate environments. How should leaders in the sector prioritize their security investments when they have to take into considerations all the limited resources?
Yeah, the easy answer is you prioritize it by the biggest risk you have to protect against. But I think in general, and I think we're going to get to this later in the conversation. I think there's a lot of things you can do that don't really require a lot of budget, and I think covering human centric risk, I think that's one of the biggest areas where you really can't buy control or buy a service off the shelf to mitigate that risk.
Mm,
You can use your position very effectively in an educational and a communicative perspective, building relationships with your, call them your end user base or whatever. But that to me, I think is much as effective or even a little bit more effective than just buying a slew of controls and hoping they'll protect you against technology risk. Most of the risk is going to come from your end users. They're going to come from uh, an omission, an error, something of that nature. And the better educated, the better trained, the better readiness that you provide your end users in your organization, I think that's going to help a long way across the board in terms of risk management.
mm. Yeah, I think ideally it would be such a perfect world if every user would act like a security person, and then it would just, drastically reduce all the exposure. Maybe at a certain point we're gonna get there because back in the days, security wasn't the topic that many boards prioritized. So maybe eventually it will all change.
I hope
And
so. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I think the reason why is the primary reason why historically it wasn't a major point of concern is because it had no easily identifiable return on investment.
mm,
It took a while. I think now folks understand vis-a-vis all the news, the mainstream news, I should say, all these reports of these pretty big breaches or attacks that are very very costly. Ransomware being, I think, one of the key headline items that we see out there. I think
yeah,
boards are really getting worried and they're starting to wake up and they're starting to say, could we be next? So that's why it's spurring a little bit more investment. Eventually, the circle will come back and close and say, at the end of the day, are we spending our dollars in the best possible way to mitigate these risks?
yeah, yeah.
Constant question. Yeah.
And especially if this is something that is happening in your industry, it's very hard not to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So you really
Yeah.
see the dollar amount that getting subtracted from some other company, and you definitely don't want it to happen to yours. So
Uh, Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. And today, workforce conducts so much of their time on the web browsers, and web browsers became such a big topic recently. We just had Atlas coming out with their OpenAI coming up with Atlas. We have Perplexity browser. We have so many new ways to access the internet. From your perspective, how has the shift changed the security landscape, and especially in the nonprofit sector?
Well, you're mentioning a couple of the artificial intelligence leaders and their respective product releases into the browser space. I think it still boils down to data protection, data resiliency, especially with AI. I think any kind of AI work, whether you're using a generative AI platform, I think
Mm,
embryonically, a lot of organizations are using some agentic AI as well. I think a lot of the data there, the challenge is going to be in the data because these types of platforms by nature rewrite or modify a lot of critical data structures that need to be protected. So I think it takes a lot more nuance to be able to protect certain types of data from being from an access perspective internally and also from an exfiltration perspective externally. So fortunately, I think we're seeing a next generation of some technical controls that are going to be able to aid with that. But the core principles still remain that you have to understand what your folks are doing, why are they doing it, how are they doing it, and by educating and training them in the right way that you need them to do or you want them to do it. To me, that's a great combination, great formula for risk management in that
yeah.
area. So that'll happen in the philanthropic space. I mean, we're essentially a private foundation.
Mm.
It's a subsection of the general philanthropic space.
So, as a CEO in this sector, who is excited to adopt new technologies, are you excited as a CISO to have your users adopt AI browsers in the near future?
Well, not without due diligence, right? I think our journey internally in AI is taking a very measured approach here at Dana. We're not going to shut it down completely because we know that's not a practical approach. However, we're very cognizant of again, back to my previous example, we're already
Yeah.
trying to look ahead 4 to 5 years, right? With the rapid changes you mentioned in technology, AI in general, it seems like every week or every other week, some new feature, a new company, or new method comes out to work with
Mm.
this. We're taking a very measured approach and looking ahead and saying, we're trying to find out where the puck is going to, skating where the puck is going to, rather than where the puck is,
Yeah.
and then building programmatically the best way to do this. We have a good governance, I'd say, profile that we've established at the foundation. Very generic, but knowing that it'll have to get a lot more sophisticated, a lot more detailed as the level of this technology keeps getting more sophisticated.
Yeah.
There's no other choice in my mind. But there's no practical way to just say we're not going to do this because of a security concern, because this is a major breakthrough. I think. I mean, to me, it's just like the .com era. You know, the web,
Yeah.
the World Wide Web in general. It's that kind of shift. It's going to be very, very exciting in the years to come.
Yeah, it will be very exciting. And it reminds me the conversation that I had with another CISO a few days back. And he mentioned that how back in the days when Facebook just came out, a lot of people were freaked out and would ban Facebook. But eventually it became a very big global phenomenon.
Yeah.
Um, so this is probably going to be, if not a bigger Facebook, in a near few years. Very
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of lessons to learn from that era too. Social media in general, I think it was definitely a new animal for us to
Hmm.
kind of work with, and I think we've learned a lot of the understanding of how data. Again, I keep sounding like a dead horse, but at the bottom line, it's all about data and how data flows, and the intents and the protections of that data and how we should classify it. It's a very, very difficult problem, but at its core, that's essentially what we're trying to do in cyber: protect
Yeah,
critical data and making sure that our data is not messed up, or it's not the wrong kind of data doesn't leak.
yeah, 100%, 100%. And I know that we spoke so much about the future, but I also would love to know if you have any particular war story from the past that must have shaped and built you up to where you are today.
Well, it's a series of them. I think starting out in my career, I mean, we've had a couple, not at Dana, thank goodness, but in previous organizations, we've had some email breaches and things of that nature, or certain virus attacks. There was kind of a few there. I think generally we learned from that. I think what really shaped where I am today is the fact that I've been through so many disaster situations, starting with 24 years ago, 9/11. I mean, that was the biggest one, I think, and I was a brand new manager, and really shaped my understanding of of resiliency. I think resiliency is the other thing I've kept harping on, but in terms of how we were not ready to respond to outage of that magnitude, and then subsequently we had a major hurricane 13 years ago, big power outages, other types of outages, the COVID situation as well. And I think my career, my approach has always been shaped by this, knowing that the next disaster, next business continuity event is just around the corner. How are we going to react to that from an operational, from a cyber perspective? How are we prepared? We know my history is we were definitely going to have one some way or some shape or some form. How are we going to
Yeah.
protect ourselves from that? So that's kind of shaped my thinking, I think, over the past 25 years, is how to prepare our whatever organization I've been in to respond to a situation like that. It's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, and those events have been so massive that had such a massive impact on every company out there.
Indeed.
It really
Indeed.
makes you think, how do you really prepare for this? Is there like a drill that you create and then you
Yeah.
just follow through?
Yeah. After 9/11, we've got very good at disaster recovery, tabletop testing, and practical testing. We had it down to a science because we essentially learned our lesson, right? We weren't ready. And after that, we were more than ready. I think drilling, testing, training, all critical areas, and every cyber leader, every infrastructure leader is going to run into the fact that this is not necessarily a top priority for other parallel lines of business in your area. But I think again, leveraging the fact that this is such a hot topic in today's world, and the news media is doing half of the work for us, reporting on a lot of these things.
Yeah.
It gives us a lot of credibility, I think, to promote these types of approaches. And again, I think there's not a lot of pushback. I think there's a lot of pressure in general. I think things are moving so fast that folks feel they don't usually have enough time to dedicate to something like this. But I think good leadership, good credibility from a leader is going to help drive that a lot better.
Yeah, definitely. And luckily, while so many things are happening, also on the security side, there are a lot of great companies that are being built. You yourself advise, invest quite a few companies in the space. Um, I'm just curious, what do you usually look for when you look at the emerging technologies that might help, with all the new issues that keep on coming up every day?
Sure, there's a couple of non-technical and a couple of technical things I usually look for in prospective, either investment or something for one of the funds. Is first of all, I want to take a look at the team. I mean, typically at that point in the early stage, you've got a founder and a co-founder, and maybe a couple other folks. I want to know about their background, about obviously about experience, and most of them that's pretty much a table stakes conversation. But it's a little nuances in talking with them and taking their approach, how they feel they can improve upon an organization's risk profile. Sometimes there needs to be some shaping in terms of their approach. So that's something that we work through with some of these folks. But I think in general, I think the bar for acceptance of solutions that may not be ready for prime time in general is getting ever higher. And I think most security leaders, most infrastructure leaders that are looking at any kind of technical controls are looking for something that will be very easy to implement, as least disruptive as possible to an organization, and gain the maximum amount of return on investment or value, uh,
Mm.
stated purpose value that will eliminate the pain that solution is designed to eliminate. Those are the key things, and if you can kind of foresee that, makes a good candidate to guide some of the rough edges out and how to bring that solution to market
Yeah,
or
this is
invest.
this. Yeah, no, this is great tips,
Yeah.
for anyone looking to better understand what it looks like for someone on the other side of the table, how they look at newer technologies today. But as you went through so many technological shifts from on-prem to cloud, what is one piece of conventional wisdom about cybersecurity that you think is quite outdated today?
Uh, there's a lot. There's a lot of varying degrees. I think you can't come in with the assumption that everybody's thinking about cybersecurity. I think the other thing is an organization doesn't merely exist to be secure. That's I would say that's a classic piece of of, uh, of advice, because a lot of cyber folks are starting, and this is one of the downsides of it getting such attention, is they're starting to think that it's totally necessary, and I think they need to take the
Yeah,
view from leadership and board of directors and say how are they looking at security? Are they looking at it as just something they need to get through to enable business operations or to cover any kind of non-fiduciary risk? It's it's a lot more nuanced than that, and I think you're always got to be learning, approaching a lot of this stuff, in general, from a need perspective.
yeah, 100%, 100%. Like this is the wisdom that transcends throughout the time and um, just constantly has to be reminded to people.
Indeed.
But yeah, for let's say for someone who is listening to this podcast that also operates in the same industry as you, um, what one step would you advise them to take to meaningfully improve their security posture?
So there's a number of low cost or free resources out there. There's a number of ISACs. There's one called the NGO ISAC, which is essentially a philanthropic ISAC, where you can gain a
Mm,
lot, both community and tips and tricks, how to start building an information security program. Obviously, there's
mm,
sort of certification tracks like ISACA and ISC2, and which, I mean, are varying degrees of cost and effort to go through these things. But thank goodness there's a lot of shared knowledge out there waiting to be used. And so I think there are, in terms of the philanthropic space, we've already got organizations like TAG, like NGO ISAC. These are great places to start figuring out how you want to build a program. Maybe you need to staff one, or maybe you need to you maybe have a question on a certain type of technical control or some other kind of risk. These are great places to start.
yeah, and I'm sure if they have any questions, amazing thing to see nowadays is that other heads of security are no longer hesitate to reach out to other heads of security and really seek advice and learn from each other.
As I stated before, it's by necessity. We can't do this all in our own silos anymore.
Yeah, 100%. And speaking about other heads of security, we have this tradition on our podcast where typically a previous guest who's also a head of security would ask question to the next one. So the previous guest asked you, how do you think human-centric security will look like in 2030 with the current technology trends?
So I think it's only going to improve. I think this is primarily a generational shift, right? I think this generation, including myself, didn't grow up with technology in its current form. We didn't have cell phones, we didn't have internet, we didn't. PCs were like an anomaly, right? I mean, some of us used them, some of us didn't.
Mm,
So I think the lift in terms of getting us in this generation to acknowledge risk, to train on risk, to train how to use this technology. You think about all these folks that that were hired that really didn't understand or really didn't learn how to use a computer or any kind of technology from a very early age. Very difficult. I think what's
yeah.
going to be easier as we move towards generations 2030 and beyond is that these folks grew up on technology. This generation used smartphones, and the
Yeah.
internet pretty much, I think, for the longest time. And if even if they didn't really understand the nuances of impacts in terms of their use of these technologies from a cybersecurity perspective, they have a
Mhm.
better understanding of the base technologies themselves, which makes it an easier lift to get them ready and to train and to guide them from a human risk perspective. And I think in tandem, a lot of the technical controls that are kind of parallel to regular training are getting a lot better, and they'll
Mm,
continue to get better. But I think ultimately, to solve the human risk perspective, you need a better trained and a better prepared human in general to combat that
interesting.
risk. Yeah.
Interesting. The next question is coming like fully from me, but do you find um, the current generation of early technology adopters more risk takers, or do you find them more security aware? Because I find it very ambiguous at times. What is your take?
Well, I think most folks that are willing to adopt, I would call in like early innovations in cyber. I think most of them are looking for a solution that's going to solve a specific pain, like I stated before. I
Mm,
mean, in terms of just adopting technology for technology's sake, it doesn't matter if it's innovative or it's legacy. Most folks are not going to adopt it if there isn't a certain need. So
yeah.
I think it really revolves around that. I think the level of risk that you're willing to take as somebody that's willing to take on innovation at an early stage, I think it's commensurate with the level of pain that you're trying to solve. Because we all know low risk, low reward. and high risk or medium or at least calculated risk, you can get a high reward. That's a winning formula for bringing on innovation at any stage.
Yeah, and I think it really transcends throughout all the industries that you operate in. Like, how much risk are you willing to take for the
Yeah,
reward?
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. What question would you like to ask to our next guest?
It's going to be very simple. What is AI going to look like in 2030?
I
We'll
don't,
leave
I
it nice and open for the next folks.
Yeah, nice and open, but I don't think that there is a right answer for anyone that is gonna come up with the answer because it's so unimaginable.
Neither do I, but it'd be interesting to see the response nonetheless.
Yeah, I'll make sure to pass the answer to you and yeah,
Yes.
connect back in 2013 just to see how things look like. Back what was the movie called? Back to the Future, where they
Back
were
to the
floating
future.
skateboards. Um, but
Could
now
be.
we should see them. Yeah, yeah. Well, Jim, it was such a great conversation. I loved learning your path into this space. Very unconventional, and I think the learning to how you get to certain organizations is that sometimes what you might think is a setback actually leads you to where you're really supposed to be.
Yep.
So it's really beautiful to see someone who's been in an organization for such a long time and really saw the whole transformation step by step, going from on cloud to from prem to on cloud to right now we're shifting even more up. And I think the main takeaway throughout this whole journey is that data is king, and
Yep.
every security measure really has to be balanced on how much risk you're willing to take, whether it comes to your organization or adoption of new technology or any new investment that you're making. So this is the biggest learning for me from this podcast. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Sasha. It was a pleasure.